Yeah.
Yeah, and I am my second year of. I think it's better if we move to the next.
Yeah, we can just we can move on to Thais then. Thais, you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Bonochi. Good evening. My name is Thais. I'm 22 years old. I'm studying biology right now. And I also tutor and teach a bit on the side. And really, I'm here tonight to speak to the candidates and to learn a bit more about your stances when it comes to certain topics and challenges that us Dutch Caribbean students face here in the Netherlands. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say.
All right. Sorry about that. That's awesome. Next, we have with us Nigel. You can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Buonochi. Hi, my name is Nigel Maduro. Yeah, I am an international human resource management student. I'm also an activist and an artist, and I am here to ask questions about anything and get perspectives on different opinions and topics about the political views. So yeah, thank you.
Nice. Thank you very much for that. Then next we have Renzo. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, hi. I'm Renzo. I am from Aruba. I've been living here in The Hague for 5 years, studying international public administration with a minor in Kingdom Relations, Dutch Kingdom Relations. And I'm also quite invested or involved in Dutch Caribbean associations here in The Hague. And yeah, like everyone else, I'm here to ask a few questions, see who I'm voting for tomorrow.
Awesome. That's very nice to hear. And then lastly, I would love to hear about our two candidates, Quinsy and Lysanne. Just if you can tell us a little bit about yourselves as well. We can start with Quinsy, maybe.
I'm Quinsy. I study theater, film, and television studies at the University of Utrecht. And then I studied the Masters of Artistic Research at the Royal Academy in The Hague. And then afterwards, I went on to do a fellowship at BOC in Utrecht and then advanced performance and sonography studies in Brussels. So I also came over as a student to study and then kind of stuck around to study a bit more. And I'm number 2 on the list for Bijeen.
Awesome. And Lysanne.
Yeah, so my name is Lysanne Charles. I studied political science and mass communications at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. And then after that, I studied sociology and cultural anthropology at the University of Amsterdam at the International School. I'm living on Saba at the moment. I was born and raised there. And then I moved to Curacao for like 3 years because at the time you couldn't study in Dutch on Saba anymore. So my mom felt that was important. She sent me to Curacao. For 3 years, I stood there. Then I went back to St. Martin. I studied at MPC for 4 years, exactly. For 4 years. And from there, I went on to North Carolina. And then afterwards, back to St. Martin to work a bit, to the Netherlands, back to Saba to work a bit, back to the Netherlands, and then back to St. Martin to work a bit. And now I'm on Saba. But I'm very, very interested in speaking to students because as an educator, I'm very committed to what happens and invested to what happens with Dutch Caribbean students because also my students are now in the Netherlands, some of them, and experiencing all kinds of things. And of course, I went as an older student there because I was like 27 when I went to the Netherlands the first time. But, like some of the horror stories that they tell me, I'm like, what? From like having to find rooms and trying to navigate insurance and all this. I was like, oh my gosh. So I'm very interested in what you guys have to say. And of course, as I said, invested in seeing something better happen for our students.
Awesome. Amazing. Okay, so as we all know, we're going to be talking about 3 different topics. The first one is going to be education, and in terms of how BayAIM can support Caribbean students coming to the Netherlands and furthering their education. And the second topic we're talking about will be kingdom relations, and then we'll be talking about so how the kingdom is set up and the inequalities that exist within different organs of the kingdom as well. And then lastly, we want to hear as well about your experiences as a Dutch Caribbean student in the Netherlands, because obviously we're coming from completely different cultures, and sometimes the transition doesn't happen as smoothly as it should. So we want to hear your questions and your concerns about these topics. So I'm going to give the word first to Renzo, so he can ask his questions on the first topic we mentioned, education.
Well, if I'm honest, education is because I've been going through the program, the BIA program, and uh, I usually ask questions on things I struggle to understand or disagree with, but to a very great extent, this is quite straightforward, and it makes a great degree of sense. So I can't really formulate any question, but I'm sure if someone else can ask one, we can get the conversation going.
Yeah, yeah, we can move it on to then maybe Thais, then she can start off with her questions.
Yes, I do have a question actually, because I saw in your program that you want to get rid of the tuition to be able to study at, let's say, university or a hogeschool. But I do have another question because many of us students come here and live in the Netherlands from a very young age, and we basically have to borrow a lot of money from Duo. And I know that all the students watching know that this is not about a couple of thousands, this is not 2,000. It's a lot of money. And then as soon as we're done studying, whether it's when you're done with your bachelor's or your master's, you are left with this huge amount of debt. And my question to you guys is, what do you think you could do to help us Dutch Caribbean students? Because I do think that this is one issue that is a bit specific to us and our situation. So what could you guys mean for us? And if you have a solution, how long do you think it would take for it to be realized?
Okay, we can give the word first out to Lisanne.
Okay, so I am one of those students, and but I will say because I went when I was older, the amount that I owe is still nothing compared to what people who I know, other people who I know who've been there for much longer, what they have. But even so, this amount is in euros, and then I am then not forced, but I'm then obliged to pay it back. And when I was on St. Martin, then of course earning guilders. I was forced to pay back in dollars, which is quite a lot with the high cost of living and unstable as well. And even now with COVID, for example, that has meant something for me and how I'm able to actually navigate and think about spending and finances and managing money and whatnot. But also, I will say this is indeed true what you're saying, because I even have friends who've said, like, listen, they want to come home, they want to be with family, they want to invest in their own island, and then they say like, well, I'm not going to do it for a while because I know if I go back, then it will be too difficult for me to pay off this loan. So one of the things that I would like as an individual is that some debt relief is given to the students who are of Dutch Caribbean background because of the unique circumstances presented to these students. What I will say is that it won't be overnight. It's something that we have to lobby for, advocate for, really present facts and figures for, because I can remember even the conversations with persons from the duo when they were first, we were like really struggling with paying. And at that time, you couldn't even pay back at a local bank. You had to pay back to the Netherlands. And many students said like, listen, then we're not going to do it. We're going to risk running into trouble with the Deurwaarde, which many of them did. But they were like, we're going to risk it because actually, like to send back $100, you would have to pay $80. And then they wanted it on a monthly basis. And finally said, okay, well, you can accumulate it and send it per year. But they still didn't take into consideration the cost of rent, the cost of food, the cost of moving around on the islands. So I wouldn't say it would happen overnight, but what I will say is that Bain will advocate very strongly that these realities of Dutch Caribbean students are taken into consideration. And in addition to that, with the fact that we would like to make tuition free, because it's just astronomical the amount of things students are forced to pay at this point.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'd like to fully agree with what Lysanne just said. And also to add to it, that it's a question of making sure that the politicians on the islands themselves bring up this point during the various kingdom conversations. So what we need to have is that as we're fighting for this here in The Hague, that also on the islands, there are people within the government who are making sure that this is part of the agenda. Because a lot of times what you see is that people here bring up issues and then the people in charge are like, hey, but on the island, they're not finding this an issue. So this needs to be something that is tackled from both sides.
Yeah. And I want to say, in addition to that, like it's important for us as students in whichever way that we can to really indicate back to our governments, our local governments as well, what we go through. Because sometimes I really think that older heads and government officials think that it's a walk in the park, or officials who went to the US, for example, instead, and who also have like, debt, but in a different way. I think they often think it's like a walk in the park. They don't realize how much students have to sacrifice, and also how much they have to acclimate in a way that's very different than you have to acclimate when you're going to the US, and what kind of stress that puts on you also in terms of figuring out how to spend, where to spend, all of these different things. In addition to that, like, being met with housing issues. So I do think, through whatever platforms we can, really lobby also with our local governments to take into consideration what students actually have to go through when they go to the Netherlands.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that one. That those are very important points you raised. I want to maybe send the word to Nigel as well, to if he wants to ask questions on the area of education as well. Nigel? Yeah.
Yes. So yes, I'm here. My question is, how do we go about with tackling the issues of decolonization within the educational system? So, yeah, how does Bain use education to help people unlearn the casual racism that is implemented in this entire country? That's my question.
We can give the word to Quinsy. You can go ahead and answer first.
I think what we need to have is schools that are accountable for the racist acts that happen within their confines. Because what we've seen with the latest scandals that have been happening is that schools have been exposed as unsafe. And those of us who've experienced racism or everyday racism within school know that it's unsafe. But it's also unsafe for women. It's also unsafe for people of different genders. It's also unsafe for different sexualities. So what you see is that there needs to be a whole reckoning with hierarchies within education. And decolonization is one of those avenues in which we can tackle that. And one of the ways in which we're fighting for that is to make sure that it's not just a question of European knowledge that's being taught, but that knowledge from all over the world is seen as important and put on the same scale. And the way you do that is by making sure that this is also available. So what we're also fighting for is making sure that there is an exchange of educational practices within the kingdom, and that it's not just a question of the Netherlands determining what types of educational forms are valid. Because there are different things and different people on the islands who are presenting things which are not reaching the Netherlands, but the other way around is happening. And I think that's one of the ways in which we can decolonize simply within the structures that we have now. But that's also thinking through the structures that we have now, but we also need to think about the other structures that we have. Like if we want to have a structure in which the islands together with the Netherlands are actually equals, that means that this needs to be done in a way that shows us what equality means in education, not just in content, but also in form.
Yeah. Lysanne, can we hear from you? Yeah, because you're also an educator, so we would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, and I think like one of the ways that we can make this happen as a collective is to find each other and support each other, and actually uplift those instances or highlight those instances when this racism happens or misogyny happens. And like to me, like one of the greatest examples of like a movement, of a demonstration coming together with the 8,000 people on the Dam, right? Like that sent a clear message instantly to politicians in the Netherlands, like, hey, listen, we have to pay attention. Now, whether they understand it, that they have to pay attention for the long term is yet to be seen. But I think this is where also we as Dutch Caribbean people can mobilize around this issue, like pay attention to each other, and really send out the signals to a party like BAE who says like, listen, we are willing to advocate on your behalf with education in the second chamber, you know. And that's one of the interesting things about BAE as well. It's a bunch of activists who really are passionate about you know, representing marginalized groups. So really send it out, let the organization know, hey, we're struggling, but also through the different student organizations in the Netherlands, also, you know, demonstrate, advocate, send petitions, let people know that, let the institutions know that you're not happy and you're not having it. But also one of the things in the platform for BAE, it says, you know, it's really about holding institutions accountable. And for example, where subsidies are given, to not give them to institutions that do not have a good name in terms of accountability, for non-discrimination, for violence, for microaggressions, like to make sure that state funds do not go to those institutions. And so that way you actually have the state also reinforcing that this is not something we want to adhere to.
Yeah, very, very good points. Very good points raised. For the last person in the segment, I want to pass the word on to Delon to see if you have any questions regarding education.
Yes, but first I have one other question to let's see, Quinsy. Yeah, I learned that in 2011 the PVV has yeah, declined a law that was there, where the government of Netherlands, before they made or push a law, that they talked with representatives of ethnical groups in the Netherlands. And I feel like that's one of the biggest and most important law that we need in this country when it comes to these specific topics, when it entails Caribbean students or students from another background that has to deal with educational problems. And what are you guys' point of view on that law? Because I feel like maybe this law can already on itself make a lot of things happen if they reintroduce this law.
That's a good point. Because I remember that moment when that happened. And what was interesting is that it was also pushed under the idea that the government had to go into austerity measures. So one of the things that they wanted to cut funds for, supposedly because there was no money, was the way in which groups from migrant communities could have, as they call it, inspraak. So a lot of these organizations, the Surinaamse inspraakorgaan, the Caribische overlegorgaan Caribische Nederlanders, the one from the Turkish community, the one from the Moroccan community, all of those different organizations were defunded at the same time. Now, the reason why they did this had nothing to do with money and everything to do with racism. And I think we have to be clear about that. So one of the ways in which we want to make sure that this comes back, or at least that the organizations get their say again, is to make sure that the organizations themselves are organized and let us know and give us information that they want to get on the floor in the second chamber. Because what you have right now are a lot of times organizations as well that do great, amazing work, but simply aren't seen, right? That simply do not make themselves known anymore, and they're pushing things and trying to do things, but they're doing it with limited budget, they're doing it with project subsidies, they're doing it with staff that has only a contract for a project and not for the whole thing. And all of those structures need to change. And so one of the things that we're advocating for is for more investment in civil society. We want more money for all of these types of organizations, because that's the main point. It's not just a question of the law, it's making sure that people get heard.
Yes, yes, very well said.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
And yes, and regarding to onderwijs, or regarding to education, I feel like there's two group of students that enters Netherlands, and those are students. For example, me, I lived 12 years in Holland. I came here when I was 12, so I entered the dual system way before, because I hear also that there's students from SSA, and they come with SSA and they have to study here. But the transition, when it comes to the transition between the island and here, there is a lot of miscommunication there because there's a lot of students not being prepared and also not being educated on what it is to study in the Netherlands. Because yes, there's a lot of things happening that is not good, but also the preparation from the islands themselves for the students to come here. What is your guys' take on how to keep the island accountable of preparing students that are moving from the island to the Netherlands in a way that you know, prepares them for every single thing that they're going to have to endure here in this country?
Yeah, Quinsy, you can go ahead and answer.
Or Lysanne, you want to go for that one?
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quick because mine is short. So I think one of the issues is that the government of all of the various entities have to come together and actually discuss and decide how this is going to look. And there needs to be an investment from the local government, but also from the government of the Netherlands into this preparation. Because one of the issues you will hear from the local governments is there is not enough funds to support departments or persons to guide and to prepare these students. There's just not enough budget in the on the islands. So I think if we actually look and we're talking about equality amongst Dutch citizens, then we also have to look at these students going to the Netherlands as Dutch citizens. What do they need, and how do we get funding for this to them? So for me, that is one of the things that has to happen, that there has to be an agreement between all parties about what this looks like, how much it's going to cost, and actually what are the structures that are actually going to allow them to be prepared and then monitored and supported while they're in the Netherlands. So that it's not, it's not just like a one-off or two-off sessions, and then afterwards, okay, you're on your own, kind of, with maybe once or twice check-ins, etc. It really needs to be seen as something that is not just in the best interest of the entities, but of these students who are citizens and who are in need and of the support. So that's where I would start out, that it actually needs to be taken up in the national education policy so that funds can be allocated on the national level for this, and then also on the islands it needs to be taken up and addressed better.
And I think to add to that, as Lysanne said, it's a question of funds. And what we're seeing now with the COHO and with all these different measures being put in place is that the funds are being directed by The Hague, right? So to make sure that the funds down there are used properly or are allocated towards the areas that need them, is to make sure that we fight here that the government gives enough money for that. So I think it's a combination of both, to make sure that here there are people fighting and there are people fighting, and making sure that they're in contact with one another. And I think to add to what Lysanne also said in terms of, and I think you also mentioned it, Dylan, is this notion of SSC, right? When I came, we had SSNA, the Stichting Studiecommissie Nederlandse Antillen. I look young, but I'm pretty old. And so the thing is, what was interesting is that back then you would have all of these students from all of the islands together, and together you would have that community. And I think the great thing about what I've understood from your different organizations is that you're trying to get to that moment again when people from the various islands meet each other, talk about what's going on. And I think that's necessary because it's so splintered. You don't know what's going on with each group, while actually the struggles actually have a lot in common. And if you have a lot of things overlapping and in common, then you can fight together because it's one struggle.
Yeah. And one question: how should we, as a student, because I feel like yes, a political organization can accomplish more, but what can we as Dutch Caribbean students do to keep those organizations accountable and to make them, do what they need to do? Because we are the future. We are going to carry the economy. We are the ones needing to fix up everything that goes wrong right now.
Yeah, Lysanne, you can take it away.
Well, one of the things I want to say is, first of all, find each other. So like the different, as students, find each other, and then find the organizations that represent you, and really participate in whatever way you can. And then as a group also hold them accountable, and also say like, listen, we think that there's more strength and unity. So we want the groups from Aruba, the groups from Curacao, the groups from St. Martin, also the groups from the Best Isles. We want you guys to find each other and let us mobilize around the issues that are most important to us. And then those organizations, once they have that solidarity, then they can also put more pressure on their various governments. And I think this is indeed, as you said, you guys are the future, and it's important to use this, to use the mechanism to kind of set up yourself and already engage, with each other in this way.
Yeah, Quinsy, you wanna add anything to what Lysanne said?
No, I think we should go to the next segment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's yeah. I was gonna suggest that next. Yeah, because you guys, both of you, offered a good segue into the next segment of the live stream, which is Kingdom Relations, right? Because Quinsy mentioned the coho, and Lysanne also mentioned a couple of key aspects, and yeah. So the essence of what we want to get to here is how can we make all of the islands within the kingdom work in a more equal way, based on solidarity and camaraderie. And because we have someone here who is doing a minor in Kingdom Relations, I want to hear from Renzo to see what he has to say about this.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I did a minor in 2019, I think, on Kingdom Relations, and I thought I walked in knowing enough about the kingdom because I'm from Aruba. I know more than Dutch people. I already know that. And for the first day, that was true. And 10 weeks later, we were actually having a debate in the Raad van State about the Council of Ministers, or the Rijksministerraad. And we came to this realization that this Rijksministerraad consists of 16 or 17 Dutch ministers and 3 Caribbean ministers, and not 3 per island, 1 per island, in total 3. And that was a whole discussion because there was an ongoing discussion in parliaments in Aruba that they wanted to change the law, but the Netherlands would not allow it. And after, because I'm part of a Dutch Caribbean Student Association, we were doing some more research. We've come to the realization that the same mentality that is applied in this ministry, or Council of Ministers for the Kingdom, is applied in general in the Netherlands. Is like, oh, you're Dutch when it benefits me, but when it doesn't, you're international. So it's an iffy topic, to say the least. But as I was going through the program, I had 2 questions that really resonated with me, which is, Bijeen wants to restructure this Council of Ministers, or remove it and put something else in place. It wasn't very detailed, but what would that replacement be? How would this be structured differently? Because I feel like if push comes to shove, if you guys do put something new in place, it's going to take a few years to effectively start functioning. And let's say you do become government. I wish you guys all the luck. And in 4 years, someone else comes and takes over, and they just put it back in the old. How would you create a system that actually stands the test of time?
Quinsy, you can take this one.
I mean, it's like you say, right? So the Rijksministerraad is not functioning. It's not built around equality. It's not built around making sure that the kingdom statute, as they were, the intention that they speak of equality within the kingdom, is functionally not there. Structurally, it's not there. So what we're advocating is actually to take it away, to abolish it, and to have a kingdom-wide council per kingdom topic, right? So if we're talking about foreign affairs, it needs to be with all of the different ministers of the island. If we're talking about migration and asylum seekers, it needs to be with all of the different. If we're talking about border patrol, it needs. So what we're actually advocating for is to make sure that it's not just a question of the Netherlands dictates anymore. Because when the Netherlands dictates, then we get the brunt of it on the island. If we look at, for example, right now, the borders of the Netherlands are actually in Aruba, in Curacao, in Bonaire, when we talk about refugees coming over from Venezuela. And then if we look at the way in which that's being dealt with, it's completely inhumane. And the only thing that the Netherlands is saying is, you know what, build more prisons. Yeah, that's not the way to do it, because we know that's not actually, it's going to fix stuff. So there needs to be actually listening to each other within the kingdom about what it is that we're talking about and how we think we can fix this.
All right.
And then, and I think to follow up as well is like, how do you make sure that this stays in place? That needs to be something that, as we said before, needs to be fought for here in the Netherlands and also on the islands. This is once again one of those things in which collaboration within the kingdom, outside of the cabinet, is essential, because I think that's one of the things that we're missing at the moment. This notion of that there are allies within the Netherlands that are advocating and fighting together with the governments of the islands. Because from left to right in the parliament at the moment, all of them are saying that most of the politicians on the island are corrupt. All of them are saying that most of the politicians on the island are rude and they don't know what they're talking about. All of them are saying that they should not have autonomy. And I'm like, what are we talking about? They have been voted on by their local constitutional, you know, the population, just like the politicians here in the Netherlands. And there again comes in this idea of this understanding that the politicians on the islands are being paid too much. But if you look at the salaries and the benefits that the politicians in the Netherlands get, it dwarfs what's going on the islands. It's completely a mess in the ways in which that's such hypocritical nonsense. But of course, that's me talking. So I'll...
No, I mean, I agree with you, because we had a meeting with the Committee for Community Relations, and in our heads, it's like, hey, they want to work towards a more cooperative kingdom. But after speaking to them and the chairman, I think it was Andre Bosman at the time, or he still is, the complete opposite impression was given, that you want to push the islands further away rather than bring them closer together within the kingdom and the Netherlands. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
All right.
For me, it also takes like it's like a re-education process as well, because like for me it's mind-boggling sometimes that, you know, there are people in the Netherlands who don't even understand the political constellation, you know, of the kingdom, first of all, and then even of the Netherlands itself with the best islands. And of course, I mean, I know there are people on the islands as well, but to me, there's much more of an awareness from the islands towards the Netherlands. And I think part of this whole idea of pushing the islands away that's happening in the Netherlands right now is because of this lack of education about the colonial past, about the legacy of that, about how this political constellation comes together. And I want to say, you know, because over and over again, I'm being told like, oh, when you talk about the colonial legacy, you're talking about racism, or you're only talking about racism. And I'm like, no, we're not only talking about racism, because and as you can see from Bayan's program, it is not only about racism, but it's also about all of the hierarchies that like come together to sort of reinforce an idea of where power should lie, or with whom power should lie. And so that's why part of it is a re-education to dismantle the hierarchies of race, language, gender, sexual orientation, all of these different things that has to happen. And I think that has to happen in the Tweede Kamer. It has to happen in the Netherlands on the community level, and then it also has to happen on the islands. You know, even now, like, you know, when I'm sometimes in the community talking to people about Bayan, about, to me, what is a very progressive, radical program, I'm often met with like, oh, but you guys aren't doing enough for this issue, or you're not doing enough for that issue, or this issue should have the priority. And actually, I'd like to say something that Audre Lorde, who is like, to me, my spiritual mentor, says. She's like, all oppressions are connected. And I think it's a time also as Caribbean people that we understand that. And we say like, listen, we can't just pick one thing to champion, but we have to find a way to champion many things together at the same time, so that we can actually create a framework and a structure that is equal for multiple groups, you know what I mean? Multiple marginalized groups, and give voice to that. So for me, indeed, if you're talking about the sustainability of a restructured Kingdom Council of Ministers, it's also about re-educating people and holding the Netherlands accountable to me for the lack of awareness in the Netherlands about this kingdom constellation, because actually the Tweede Kamer is making decisions then for people based on being elected by people who don't know much about a whole segment of its population. And that just, you know, boggles my mind every time.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I want to pass the word then to Kim Kevel, and then I want to hear lastly then a little bit from Alicia as well, because we haven't heard from her, and then we can move on to the next topic. Okay, well, yeah, take it away.
Yeah, thank you for your time. I think what Renzo and Mr. Quinsy and Miss Charles just said. In the kingdom, the Dutch kingdom, we have something called a democratic deficit, which pretty much translates into Holland as an independent country within the kingdom, just like St. Martin, Curacao, and Aruba, has a supranational position on top of us, which has a colonial past. That is something that Quinsy, I think you're the guy in the party, and I think that's it. Oh, there are two, both Quinsy, sorry. The democratic deficit is something that there is academic literature on it. I've used it in research in the past during my first and my bachelor, my master as well. Something you can use, and there's research on that, literature on that. You can look into that. The structure is pretty much what has existed since 1954, since the kingdom was formed. Before that, you had pretty much the empire and the colonies and whatnot. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say on that. And I think Mr. Quinsy, the one on the right of my screen, said that Venezuela, how we handle our human rights, how we handle the refugees is an issue, but also think about the embargo and the economic sanctions that the UN and the EU and then the Netherlands indirectly has laid on Venezuela. So Curacao, Aruba, St. Martin, but also Statia, a lot of economic activity that has to do with the refineries, the storage of oil on Statia, that's the main income. On Bonaire, that's also a main income. Curacao pretty much built its economy in the past, and Aruba as well on the refineries. So all of that has a direct impact on the economy and the possibilities that are there. Now, if we try and change the structure, hopefully in the future we can have a more representative kingdom whereby we just not want more autonomy, but we can work together and resolve issues in a responsible and sustainable manner. So not just being constantly told what to do or that we are corrupt, but we are this or we are that, but work together to create something better and stronger. So that's what I wanted to say on that. I like the initiatives in general. And yeah, thank you.
Very, 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 very well said. Then I want to pass the word on to Alicia so she can round us up in the section.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been struggling with the Wi-Fi for a bit. To be honest, I don't really know much about the kingdom relationship between Aruba, Curacao, and the Netherlands. But this is a very direct question because I just recently read about it. It's about this news article, and it was about something that they were going to build something on Aruba, I think. Has anyone read about that? Sorry?
The Lancier platform that Forum for Democracy wants to build.
Yeah, a lot of people are disagreeing with it, and I mean the citizens of the island. And I think everybody knows that the flora and the fauna is dying, and there are people building a lot of hotels. But I read that this is coming from within the Netherlands. And what do you guys think about that? And do you guys think it's a good idea or not? And what would you guys do?
Any of the candidates, you can take it away. We can give it to Lysanne. Go ahead.
Yeah, admittedly, I don't know much about this, so I'd have to go and research it. But one of the things that I will say is that this is another issue where if there is pushback already on the islands, it's something that needs to be taken up. And then it's going back to this idea of the democratic deficit, actually like letting local voices also be heard and have weight. So if there's pushback on the islands, it's not something that then should be like sort of forced through, but it's actually something like that should be, so a step back and listen, understand what is happening, why there's a pushback, more consultation. And indeed, like, so this whole idea of building and whatnot, because even in the Netherlands, we know like how for a long time nature was very protected, and now there's sort of like a change around that, even like no, just build or and I think so this is an area again where local grassroots organizing is important. Also people turning up and supporting parties that stand for this, so the protection of nature on the local level, island levels, and on the national level. because otherwise, governments to me go in the direction that they think the population is going in as well. And so pushback from the population also indicates to them, listen, this is not acceptable. And again, finding each other as islands, because I know this is not the only island. So initially when you were talking about, I thought you were talking about Bonaire, because I know there's also like some development happening there where Bonaireans are like, no, we do not want this. This is not acceptable. And there's also sort of like a steamrolling happening from the Netherlands. So I think this is again where the islands also have to figure out ways to speak to each other, even though they're separate now, and actually create solidarity on certain issues and saying like, listen, hey, we are serious together about this. And that's going to take a lot of work. It's not an easy thing, because we also have our internal biases against each other as islanders. And that's something that we also have to actively work to get away or move away from, so that we can talk to each other and work together on certain critical things.
Yes.
Yeah. So the plan actually came from the extreme right. This is a plan from Forum for Democracy, which actually need to change their name because they have nothing to do with democracy, but that's a different conversation. And basically what they want to do is they're seeing the islands as playthings where they can put platforms for the super rich. They're trying to connect to all of these Richard Branson type people who want to colonize space, Elon Musk and those type of stuff. So that's what they're actually looking for. And I think what needs to happen, like Lysanne said, is this local pushback and making sure that this plan never gets off the ground, because this is complete nonsense. Okay, let me stop it there before I go off on a rant.
The thing, when I saw this, my first thought was neocolonialism. Because how do you go to an autonomous country within the kingdom as a separate country, separate but equal country within the kingdom, and tell them, yeah, we're going to put a Lancera platform? Like, how do you connect? Who suggested this? What is their background? I want to question the IQ, but that just sounds offensive.
No, I get what you mean, because when I hear stories about my grandmother and my family from Aruba, it all sounds very beautiful with nature and stuff. And right now, when I look back at the island, it looks like it's a new Disneyland, because of how everything is built. There's not much left of the beach, the birds and the trees. Everything is very modern, and it's not really that Aruba anymore. And the same thing goes for Curacao, for Bonaire. I think everything is too it's too Disneyland.
I think
I also
sorry.
Yeah.
I also wanted to add something on that point, because I believe that on the islands, a lot of people are not really actually involved with the democracy on itself, because a lot of people don't vote. But I do believe that, and I also want to ask you guys, do you guys think that it's a good idea to have referendums on the islands, and also that they make it possible for Antillian people living in Holland to vote on the island? Because that's an issue where, for me, needs to be high on the agendas, because if we cannot vote on the island, a lot of people that do not know what happens from outside of the island cannot be protected, or kept from doing or voting for certain parties that they shouldn't.
So I just want to say quickly on the previous issue too, that is also like what Alicia said, because on St. Martin it's very much the same thing, right? So if you look at pictures from the 1970s compared to now, is really overbuilt. And I think though there is where we have to put some pressure on our local governments to say like, listen, we need you to also think not just in terms of development, which of course is important, but on human and sustainable development. So don't just be throwing things up left, right, and center, and then you have nothing to give to the generations that come next, So for sure, I think like that is something that we have to do again on both levels. Locally, we have to organize and hold our own local governments accountable. And then we also have to hold the government from the Netherlands accountable, and also these parties who actually want to come and reintroduce this kind of neocolonialism, etc. And then for a minute, I forgot the question that was posed next. So if you could just remind me. Dylan, what you said?
Yeah, so my question was referendums on the island.
Okay,
What do you
yeah.
guys think about that? And also, another next question is for them to make it possible for Antillian people living in the Netherlands to vote
Yeah.
on the parliament, things there.
Yeah. So, for example, one of the things I've always advocated for students still being able to vote. Like, I don't understand why students are removed from the electoral process. Now, of course, I can understand that maybe local governments as well don't want people who have been removed from the islands for like 20 years, sorry, Quincy, 30 years, to be able to vote in the local elections, because maybe, also the bulk of people who are outside there is quite a bit. But I think that there should be some parameters that are set up that do allow people who are not so removed from life on the island, but who also have different ideas to be able to participate in local elections for sure. And yes, I think that there should be not just referendums though, but also education campaigns around critical issues on the island. So to let people know, different points of view, and then also, yes, allow them to be a part of the decision-making process.
Quincy, anything to add? Or if you don't, we can also move to the next segment.
I said let's go to the next segment.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So before we go to the next segment, I just want to mention to our viewers that if you have any questions on whatever we're talking about, you can post them in the chat, and I'll be looking at it, and I can ask the candidates, and they'll try their best to answer your questions. But moving on to the next segment, we want to talk about your life as a student, as a Dutch Caribbean student in the Netherlands, because a lot of us face a lot of difficulties in terms of, first of all, getting over racial biases that already exist in the Netherlands about Caribbean students or Caribbean people in general. We also have to get over the hurdles of language barriers, because Dutch is not our main language in the islands. So there's a lot of barriers we have to get through to be able to have a good life, a good start here in the Netherlands. So I want to hear from the students, and we can start with Nigel. Yeah, you can go ahead and tell us, ask any questions or concerns.
Okay, so my question is, what are your concrete and feasible plans for decolonization and reparations? Because Netherlands, their form of reparation, or saying sorry for murdering, stealing, raping, or colonizing our ancestors, is basically giving us a Dutch nationality. So what are your concrete plans on decolonization and reparations?
Quincy, go ahead.
Oh, concrete plans. I mean, we have 8 minutes before the end. So I want to say a lot. And yet at the same time, I'm like, it's all in the party program, which you can find on the website, www.ba.org. So I would recommend everyone who's watching and who's like, hey, you want to know what's actually in there, go check it out, because it's all laid out pretty beautifully, I would say. And also pretty rigorously, because I think when we think about reparations and when we think about decolonization, I think sometimes it remains in like a monetary segment, but it needs to be about ecology, it needs to be about healthcare, it needs to be about education, it needs to be about all those various terms, and also, especially as we were talking about earlier, political and economic, right? One of the things that we don't talk about a lot is that when 1954 and the Kingdom Statutes happened, is that from one day to the next, we went from being a colony to having autonomy as islands without any type of structural reparation of what was done. If you look at Curacao, if you look at St. Martin, if you look at Aruba, if you look at all these various places in which there was um, extractive economies, where, for example, with the oil refineries on Curacao, Shell came on the island in 1917, never paid a cent of tax, right? And so in 1954, all of a sudden, the islands which didn't benefit from the stuff that was destroying their ecological system was just, supposed to deal with it. And then in 1982, they leave, and then they pay a single guilder in terms of not having to have any responsibility for the health damages and for the ecological damage afterwards. I mean, that is what we need to be talking about when we talk about reparations, not simply about how much money should we give the current government. So that's one of the things which I think is good to highlight. But I would suggest everyone go take a look at the party platform. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, Lysanne, if you
And
want to add something.
yeah, I just want to say, like, in addition, because Quinsy said it all pretty much, but like one of the things in the platform that I really lobby for, and I want to continue to lobby for even after the election, is sort of an idea of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because it then forces us to have the difficult conversations that the Netherlands has been very good at shying away from over the last decades. And I think it's something that we actually need to talk about. And when like when you try to bring it up, people go like, oh, you guys are living in the past, or you're dwelling in the past. And one of the things that I like to say is, listen, I don't see myself as a victim of the past, but I do see myself as an heir to it. And as an heir to the past, it means that certain things that happened then continues to have influence on how we are able to navigate as countries, as societies, and as individuals. And we need to be able to unpack that in a space where there can be accounting on all sides, not just on one side or the other, but on all sides, and that we can actually look at the different complicated layers of colonialism and say, okay, we're ready to do something about that. We're ready to do something about that. And a lot of people are reluctant to do it because of fear, but I think it is something, is a hard, difficult conversation that we have to have. And I believe that BAE will continue to advocate for this even after March 17.
That's an amazing answer. Thank you very much for that. And then lastly, I want to hear from Thais, because we haven't heard a lot about you. So go ahead, tell us your thoughts.
Yes. Oh, I just had a last very quick question, which I think is a pretty important one. It's about housing here in the Netherlands, especially for us as a Dutch Caribbean students, because not only is it very hard to find a room here or an apartment, but it is very expensive. And a lot of students even face discrimination or racism when they are trying to look for a place to stay. So I just want to hear from you guys what you think can be done from the Netherlands or from The Hague to ensure that we have roofs over our heads when we get there, because that does impact our academic performance and our general well-being as well. So,
Quinsy, go ahead, take it away.
One of the things that we're advocating for is for, in the law, in the Constitution, not just to have the right for a right to living or a recht op wonen, but to have recht op woonruimte. And those are two different things. So we need to be advocating for the fact that there are a lot of empty spaces, a lot of office buildings, a lot of speculation being done with the housing by outside entities, which are actually driving out the prices, right? And one of the things that we're seeing now, especially during the pandemic, is that people are working at home, and that all of these places, which could be housing units, are sitting there empty. There is so much space in this country which is just simply not being regarded as space because of zoning laws, because of zoning regulations, because of lobbyists, because of people like Prince Bernhard, who by himself owns more than 600 houses in Amsterdam. I mean, these are the types of things that we're trying to fight for and make sure that housing becomes a right. Under the current cabinet, and actually under all the cabinets of Rutte for the last 10 years, homelessness has doubled, right? Homelessness under single Black men has quadrupled. And I think that's something that we need to be talking about. And it's not just a question of looking at the available space, it's also the question of the different types of laws that we put in place. It's no longer allowed to squat, and we want to bring that back. Because when you squat a building, you show that the building can be used, which was previously empty for a long time. One of the things that we want to stop as well is the verhuurdersheffing. And that's a heffing which large corporations that rent out living spaces actually have to pay a fine if they have more than 50 properties. So one of the reasons why you see that a lot of social housing is dilapidated, not being invested in, is because they simply have no money, because they have to pay that to the government, right? So that needs to go. And another thing that we want to tackle is simply the fact that also you're if you're living together, let's say, and one of you has an uitkering or one of you has bijstand or getting some type of assistance from the state, you all of a sudden have to share the costs, right? The kostendelersnorm, which is also a fine. Also, that needs to go. And one of the things that we're trying to do as Bijeen is to make sure that the left parties that voted for all these nonsense and this mess get pulled back to their senses, Because I think what we've been missing in the cabinet, or what we've been missing in the parliament in general, is a good opposition to these things, because they're abstracted to numbers without actually being connected to faces and to people's lives, right? People's lives are being seen as chips to be put in and to be bargained with to get something else. And one of the things that Bijeen advocates for is to make sure that we keep thinking about the human lives behind the policies that we're fighting for or pushing for. And especially when looking at students, I remember last year hearing that SSA was pushing for students to get out of the houses in July during a pandemic. And I was like, what is this mess? What is going on here? And I think that's a connection between simply the fact that we have a housing crisis in general for everybody, that we have educational issues because students need to come up and they need to have places to stay. And all these things need to be taught off in a more structural, a more sustainable way, and not just one-off solutions, because a one-off solution will not fix the problem for the rest of us. And I'm looking at the time, and I'm also looking at Denise, who's typing out all the words that people are seeing. Thank you, Denise. Hopefully we get like a couple more minutes. Because then we can wrap it up. But I think in terms of answering your question, Thais, it's about thinking through these structural changes that we need to have. And we have to make sure that the left parties in parliament stick to their supposed intentions and principles. Because up to now, they haven't been doing that. And a party like Bijeen will make sure that they don't forget what is at stake.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to give Lysanne some closing remarks, and then we'll round off the live stream.
Yeah, actually, Quinsy said it all. And for me, I just want to say, indeed, that is one of the things that Bijeen seeks to do. And then our party leader said as well, that, you know, it seeks to be a voice in the opposition that reminds the parties, the left-leaning parties, that you put people in policies before bureaucracy. And I think that's been something that's been happening over the last 30 or so years, but especially in this last 10, 15-year period. And I think it's something that we have to move back away from so that we can put people first and actually find solutions that center people. And that's it.
That was very well said. Well, then, I am very happy to have heard good questions from our students and also good answers from our candidates as well. I hope that you guys as students walk away with a more clear decision as to who you want to vote for and whether you want to vote for Bijeen. And I also hope that you got to know our candidates and what Bijeen stands for a little bit more. And I just wanted also.
I have one question, if I may. I have one question, if I may.
Let's keep
one
it very
tiny question. Yeah, it's very important. First, pyramid of Maslow: food, drinks, and housing. And then you can think about other things. And I feel like policies also should be made thinking about the pyramid of Maslow. The second question, right now we're in the midst of a pandemic. It seems like a lot of people are forgetting that we're in the midst of a pandemic. And also, let's say, for example, Bijeen becomes the biggest party in the parliament, and we have a prime minister. What have Bijeen for an idea of how we should tackle the issue of the pandemic and making like society open again?
All right, we're gonna give the answer to the time for Quinsy. Let's keep it a little bit short so we can still stay within time, and then we're gonna officially close off the live stream.
I think there's a lot to be said for that. So I don't think it would be fair for me to go into that because we simply don't have any time anymore.
Yeah.
But after this, I'll talk to you, Dylan. Thanks for the question.
All right. Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Quinsy. Then I want to thank both the candidates and the students for being here. This is very important, and I'm happy that we are all here together and we were able to talk about these things. And we'll see you then. We'll see you guys at the polls tomorrow. Go vote.